Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're here for this week's One Last Thing with co-host Slava Cooperstein. Slava, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Ken. How are you?
No complaints. Heading out, going to London, and we want to make sure we got this recorded because I think you've got a really good topic for us today, Slava. And I kind of want to let you introduce it here because I think this is your brainchild.
Yeah. So the season is a very long thing, right? 17 weeks. I prefer not to, get too high or too low throughout the season. I'll leave the teeth gnashing to other folks. But when I look at a game that was as disappointing, sort of an execution and performance as last week's game against the Steelers, a game that we were in until the end and absolutely should have won running away, I started to think about like some of the things that we can very realistically clean up in the middle of this season, things that we can basically do with the tools that we have at our disposal. So, for instance, I'm not talking about, trading for an offensive tackle if either one of the tackles' health doesn't prove to be, sustainable throughout the season. I'm really talking about more realistic things that we can do with the players and resources that we have at our disposal.
Okay, so some specific things that we're going to exclude from this sort of a discussion is how the Ravens fixed their offensive tackle woes by trading their 1 and their 2 to Minnesota to get, Christian Darrisaw or we're not talking about that. We're not talking about changing their running back and wide receiver room dramatically to get players that would correct for the injuries that are there. And we're certainly not talking about going out and getting an edge rusher, although that might happen later in the season, or additional cornerback depth. We're talking about what can you do with what you have on hand to try and improve your chances to win games.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Things that really illustrate how the margins in the NFL are really so narrow that if you fix, A, B, and C, which are not that difficult to do, or shouldn't be that difficult to do if you expect to be a contending team in the postseason, that you're going to get a lot of increase in performance and efficiency.
All right, outstanding. So let's come up with a one of these items you'd like to see fixed, and then I'll do one as well.
Yeah, one of the things that I'd like to see addressed are these communication breakdowns that have been referred to in a number of the Ravens post-game pressers. I mean, the two largest ones being Zay Flowers during the kick return against the Colts, not being aware that he needed to run the ball down to 2 minutes, and as well as that unexpected snap from Linderbaum this past week. Linderbaum did sort of take the hit for that a little bit, and I think you and a number of other people kind of saw that on the All-22 that Zay maybe gave some kind of a thumbs up that he indicated that he understood the situation or whatever. Mm-hmm. But these things are sort of discussed in kind of a nebulous manner when speaking to the media, and it just can't happen. It's situational football. The Ravens have left timeouts, I think, in every single one of these games so far. I don't think they've used up their timeouts yet. If you have young players, inexperienced players, whatever the situation is, if it's an unusual situation, take the time to make sure everybody knows what's going on. I'm laying this at Harbaugh's feet because, we don't know necessarily who's in charge of every single situation, but at the end of the day, the boss is the guy who needs to take responsibility.
So I'm not sure what the definition of a quality job definition is for a quality control coach necessarily. It's probably much more broad than game management, but maybe there does need to be a game management coordinator and somebody who is creates a set of terminology that goes with specific situations, because players got to understand better what the rules are in every situation. So if you may have a rundown 2, but you have some word for it, like Geronimo or whatever, that right. means that we need to get this clock down to 2 minutes on this return right now. and you call it. But there needs to be a methodology in the huddle. I mean, the Steelers made an enormous mistake in this game that if the Ravens had made it, I'd have been pissed. I'd have really been pissed. But on the 41-yard touchdown pass to Pickens, he should have knelt it inside the 5, and they would have just knelt and kicked for the win. And there'd have been nothing the Ravens could have done about it. No chance to come back. And it was an enormous error. When I saw him do it at the bar, I'm thinking, well, that's bad for the Ravens, but that's an unbelievable mistake. And it's just the kind of thing that if the Ravens had done, I'd have really been pissed if he'd have scored that touchdown. And I could see Zay Flowers going in on that. I really could. I don't know that he'd have the on-field awareness to realize, hey, we've got a kneel kick situation, and I'd rather have a 0.5% chance of losing the game than a 30% chance of losing the game. But that's what the situational awareness is about, and maybe that needs to be a regular, coached up element that they look at for 45 minutes per day, and they have some terminology that basically tells them don't score on this play if you get a first down, kind of thing.
It's actually funny that we're having this conversation because just a couple hours ago, Zrebiec tweeted out a photo of Lamar chatting with Mike McDonald, and as well as the Ravens quality control coach Daniel Stern. And I was thinking about this topic, and I was thinking to myself, like, I wonder what that guy's like exact role is. I'm not laying it at his feet or anything.
Yeah,
but
Stern comes from the analytics side, and he's had, I think, a very broad impact on the Ravens. But he's on there on field for coaching elements. Matt Weiss kind of had a similar role, I'll say. He was a Yale economics guy, I think, and he's now the quarterbacks coach at Michigan. But he had I think he had cornerbacks coach for 1 year for the Ravens, I want to say. So he's moved along and taken various roles. He started in the organization as kind of basically Harbaugh's assistant. I think I would call him Biz, because he's with the organization in 2011. I know that for a fact. But Stern, yeah, a lot of all I can say is I think his role is pretty broad in terms of what he is thought to have responsibility for.
Right. Yeah, it's whatever the whoever's responsible for it. I think somebody needs to be a little bit more aware that these situations are cropping up and we're just not executing during them, and it's been costly twice.
All right, I'll come up with a second thing, and we'll go through these a little quicker. I think the offensive line penalties have been a problem again. And the biggest perpetrator is exactly the guy we might have expected it to be, and that's John Simpson. Now, the hope was from the preseason, he played very well, and he didn't have any penalties. And I thought, well, if you're looking for an area of improvement for John Simpson, if he could just get rid of a good percentage of those penalties, he'd have been a much better player than he was in Las Vegas, obviously. And he had 17 penalties and 1,545 snaps, one every 91 offensive snaps. And they were big ones: 2 false starts, 13 holds, and 2 personal fouls. So that's the wrong kind of relationship for that. I've said that so many times, I know it by heart. Well, this year, 4 penalties, 3 of them holding calls, and 1 every 48 snaps. And all I can say is the Ravens have not done anything to improve the John Simpson situation, to really coach him up on how to, when you need to release, when you're getting outside the frame on a holding call. So most of the time, as we know, holding calls are not necessary to happen. He's been the biggest single problem, but they probably need to have it within the context of a class, probably with some mentorship in terms of a player like Zeitler, who's not often called for a hold, talking about what tricks he uses to know when it's time to release. A lot of offensive linemen, hearing players like Ben Powers will talk about a very sharp degree of focus they have on their opponent, such they're looking at the top of the right number on their jersey to try and maintain their hold on that. You also have to have awareness of what's going on around you. Like, where's the football? Be thinking about where's that play going? Where's the football going to be? And at what point is my influence on that play over? So any kind of activity outside the frame should be an immediate release and consequences be damned, because a holding call is very serious.
Yeah, and hopefully Simpson will also have a little bit more consistency on who's playing on the on his left side as well, and hopefully that'll be helpful. But yeah, I mean, it's something that a little targeted coaching certainly couldn't hurt. So the next one that I wanted to talk about was special teams. Special teams has not been super good this year. I think, there have been some pretty significant returns against the Ravens, and I think that certainly part of it is, that some of our core special teamers have gone down. Tylan Wallace, Daryl Worley. You can't really do a whole lot about that. I sort of think that in some circumstances we can maybe stand to be a little bit more conservative with our approach, both to coverage and returns. I mean, I think returns is a little bit easier, certainly like kickoff returns, right? You don't necessarily need to have Devin Duvernay out there doing kickoff returns if he's capable of, helping out in another capacity on the returns. You can really have anybody out there doing a kickoff return and just, catching it and within the 25-yard line and kicks it out to the 25-yard line. Doesn't matter if it's somebody who's a really valuable player like Kyle Hamilton or something like that, somebody with good hands, as long as you're telling them do not return this.
I mean, I think that's a very valid point. I mean, the one of the things about this, and I don't know what the rule is, if you drop the fair catch, can you then advance it, or are you stuck at that yard line if you drop it, if you don't fair catch it correctly? Right. I don't know what the rules are. So it may be that there's actually some risk to a muff of a fair catch inside the 25 that it can't be advanced. If that were true, then you're kind of forced to return it anyway. Right. But I honestly just don't know the rules. Having good fair catch hands out there would take an extra value. They used to put Ed Reed back when they needed designated fair catcher because he was outstanding at it. But maybe they figure out who that guy is on the current Ravens team and put it back there, because it doesn't seem to be an injury risk to that player. It seems like just a ball tracking responsibility to make sure you. And Duvernay honestly might be the Ravens' best guy at it. So I'm not saying he's not. But yeah, it's something. This fits right into the notion that if you're the better team, you want to play small pot poker, and you really don't want to have any individual plays have a big impact on the game if you could avoid it, because your regular plays from scrimmage should tend to benefit you. And so you want the bulk of plays over a long period of time to help. So the last thing you want is to be put deep in a hole by a holding penalty on a return, or when you're kicking it off to give the other team, the ball past midfield or potentially risk a touchdown, to create a lot of variance in that play just does not benefit you as the better team. Even though the Ravens might have a positive expectation if they try and pooch, it still might not be enough to overcome the variance. So anyway, I would completely agree that I think minimizing the impact of special teams is probably one thing they ought to look at, even though it's been something that's been generally positive for the Ravens over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. You might be willing to live with a little bit of a longer return on average, but to sort of help eliminate those home run sort of returns as well. If you're not confident in how those guys are, how your coverage teams are, tracking the kick return or something like that. There are these little things that they can definitely do to maybe, like you say, take a smaller bet on those plays.
All right, well, let me go to another, and I think this is a fairly obvious one, is turnovers. The Ravens need to reduce turnovers, and there have been some of them that you just can't avoid, and I think that was probably true of Stanley getting beat as bad as he did on the sack. Was going to be a forced fumble pretty much no matter what from the blind side like that. But there's been others where Lamar's been on the move, or Lamar's been handing off to Hill, or other things have been going on where things are just not going right. So some additional ball security practices would seem to be appropriate at this point, given the amount of trouble they've had it. And I know that between 2018 and 19, for example, the Ravens did a lot of things to try and correct ball security, particularly with Lamar, who had a lot of fumbles in that rookie season. And they largely got away from fumbling in 2019. Offense was tremendously efficient. I would try and do some self-scouting on what they did to reduce fumbles at that point. to reduce fumbles here. There was other turnovers from bad decision making that I think, frankly, some of it's play calling, but some of it's also just decision making. Is those kind of the low percentage fade route. I hate. I really hated it the week before, even though it went to it for a touchdown for Andrews. It wasn't exactly the same route, but it was thrown to the same part of the end zone with even more coverage. And Lamar's incredibly fortunate that ball wasn't intercepted. He threw a perfect ball. What are you going to do? He threw up a 3-point shot from midcourt effectively and made it. It's hard to criticize that shot, but it still was a pretty low percentage attempt on that touchdown pass. But anyway, I think different ways to secure the football for fumbles is probably the more important thing they could do to reduce turnovers right now.
Yeah, and I would also say that there's a material difference between the throw to Andrews and the throw to OBJ. Was that I really didn't think anybody other than Andrews was going to come down with that ball. Could have been, it would have had to have been an incredible play, right? Not to say it's impossible, but an incredible play.
With the busy fall season already in swing, you might be looking for wholesome, convenient meals for jam-packed days. Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit, can help you fuel up for breakfast, lunch, and dinner with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. You'll save time, eat well, and stay on track with your healthy lifestyle. Guys, I've shared moving. I was using this for all my meals. Now I'm working from home. Guess what? Microwaves in the other room. I'm using this for all my meals. Factor is how I get through my lunch day every day. But they've got breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I haven't tried the breakfast ones yet, but why not? I think I might add that to my next order. But I love them for lunch. Plus, they've got new autumn fall flavors out right now for limited time, featuring seasonal veggies like cranberry, pecan chicken, and apple Dijon pork chops. And again, just like everything else, they're ready in just 2 minutes. They'll satisfy your fall cravings during this busy season without the hassle. So go ahead and level up with Gourmet Plus options as well, prepared to perfection by chefs and ready to eat in record time. Treat yourself to upscale meals with premium ingredients like broccoli, leeks, truffle butter, and asparagus. Head to factormeals.com/Ravens50 and use the code Ravens50 to get 50% off. That's code Ravens50 at factormeals.com/Ravens50 to get 50% off your Factor meal today.
The ball that was thrown to OBJ and why it's such a frustrating decision, to say nothing of the play call, is that at best it was ever going to be like a 50-50 ball. I mean, at the very best, I really he gave the defender every chance to get his hands on that thing, and he did, which is, I think it was a poor decision. I think it was a silly play call, particularly when you have, Lamar has been so efficient and effective at the goal line, running it in himself. The offensive line has done a great job at the goal line, and you just have other options. You got a lot of options, and wasn't happy about that one.
I definitely like going high over the middle a lot better, that's Andrews, OBJ, Aguilar. Any of those guys would be good in terms of crossing over the middle of the field. Yeah. It's much more easy to avoid defenders that way. What the Steelers took away in this game, I thought very effectively, was any ability for Lamar to work his magic at the goal line where he moves left to right to find a throwing lane. Mm-hmm. And that in 2019 in particular, he had that incredible run of never being intercepted in the red zone that was largely fueled by the fact that they never threw any of these BS fade routes. Yeah, other teams are doing it, and they're finding a laser tag point there to hit the receiver, and it just were much more effective doing that. But the Steelers took that away with their good edge rushing and the fact that the tackles were broken down in terms of any kind of moving left to right. He could have left the pocket and try and found space. Then you bifurcate the field. You really want to be able to have the option to move in the pocket, a few yards left, a few yards right, kind of thing, and that just wasn't there for the Ravens.
Yeah, and of the two Lamar turnovers that game, that one was certainly much more frustrating from the perspective of Lamar. I don't put the some people were rolling their eyes at the fumble, but I don't put that on Lamar at all.
Yeah, it was really his only bad play of the game when it comes down to it. It was the play.
Yeah. So speaking of Lamar's only bad play of the game. Where everything else from the perspective of how he was slinging it throughout the game was really good up until the point where the receivers needed to make the catch. So another thing that the Ravens can certainly do is clean up some drops. And go ahead.
I agree completely. What do you think of all of the talk that's been going on nationally about the rugby balls?
I hadn't heard about this actually.
Okay, so apparently the Ravens have been doing some practicing. I think this is something from the wide receiver coach Lewis brought in that they've been trying to catch a rugby ball instead of a football because you have to catch it with two hands. And so they've been doing some drills of that. Now, first of all, I guarantee you this is just one little drill that they might do for 10 minutes once every 2 weeks or something. It's not, it's not going to be a big thing. So those total rugby things, it's not like they're practicing with a rugby ball out of a jugs gun. So I think it's much ado about nothing is what I'm basically saying. Most of their catches are made with every other type of drill, with the standard football, standard defenders, standard whatever. And if there's something going on with the rugby ball, I think that's just BS in terms of doing it.
This reminds me of when Andre Agassi was a much younger man. He was training. He wrote about this in his autobiography. He was training, and his trainer for that day happened to not be available, or he wasn't around, or something. And the guy who was running the training facility that Agassi was using noticed that, or Andre Agassi noticed that guy was kind of looking at his sort of training regimen a little funny, and he said, what do you think about this? And he's like, well, okay, you're running 10 miles. Do you ever run 10 miles during a match? And Andre Agassi goes, no. So I was like, why? Then why are you doing? Why are you training that way? So I would hope that the Ravens are not doing more than what you're saying. One or two reps with the rugby ball. I've also heard I think like catching soccer balls, like they have to really catch with their fingers and things like that. I'm sure all that stuff's very important, but bottom line, it was just I think it sort of showed like a little bit of a poor mental focus from the receivers on a day. And I think that they let this, first couple drops get in their heads, because I don't know how you had it charted. PFF prior to this game had it charted that a Ravens receiver hadn't dropped a single ball. I don't know how that's possible, because I think I remember Duvernay dropping a pretty difficult one earlier. But regardless of how anybody charts it, they hadn't. It's not like drops had been a problem this year. So I think that when that sort of comes up, I think the Ravens need to do something a little bit to just kind of get something positive going. If the passing game isn't working, maybe you try to do, try to run it a little bit more, or try, some of your gadget plays, or a nice easy one to Andrews or something like that. But
it's all good. I like the fact that, some of the players who've had difficulties or weren't getting catches, they try to scheme right into the action during the scripted parts, including that throw to Bateman right off the bat. It's a little 8-yard throw, little designed roll. I don't think Bateman was necessarily the primary, but he's the easy secondary target on that throw, and it was just nice to see him do that. Really well designed play, by the way, to take T.J. Watt out of the play there. But I do think all of the receivers who had drops this last week, they probably want to scheme them back into the offense fairly quickly in this game against the Titans. And Lamar needs to build trust with all these guys. I don't know what the situation is with Aguilar after that game. Is he able to put that away? Maybe. Does Lamar still have the same level of trust in him? Andrews had several of the drops. Is he either 2 or 3? But did he lose any trust with Lamar of this? I hope not, because I don't know who would have a bigger trust bank account than Andrews at this point with Lamar's career. I'm a little concerned about Flowers, but then again, I'm not really concerned about Flowers because there's no other option in terms of who Lamar goes to. What was nice about this game from a thing, and this is something that is there were a mess of throws between 10 and 20 yards that Lamar made, and some deeper than that. And that intermediate passing game has been something was really missing. The between level 2 and level 3 passing game has been something that's been really missing during the Roman era are much less prevalent. They had a lot of little short, get the ball out quick, turn Marquise Brown into a 5 yards per target receiver when Huntley is in the game. They've had some of that going on, but they rarely have had a game this good in terms of getting the ball into space to receivers who are open, despite the results.
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember the last time I saw a game where I was as thrilled with every single decision that Lamar made. I mean, I think Lamar's great, but I just really thought this game he was finding the open guy. The guys were getting schemed open. I also don't remember the last time we had this many guys wide open. Mm-hmm. And actually, one of the things that I thought was really encouraging was, even though Bateman had a drop early in the game, he went back to him later. He wasn't putting anybody in the Lamar doghouse, right? He was going back to his guys. He was saying, "I'm going to take the guy that's open," and so I think they need to stick with the game plan, and guys just need to focus up and make their plays.
All right, I think you've done 3. I think I have one more to go here.
I think so, yeah.
All right, so the biggest one I have with the current personnel is secondary deployment, and this comes down to an important feature this last week. Now, the Ravens had 4 guys return: Ronnie Stanley, Marcus Williams, Beckham, and instead of the defender, and I keep forgetting who this is. This has happened once before too. Humphrey.
Yeah.
So what I'll say is each of those guys actually contributed to the loss in a significant way. Now, some of it is it's maybe poor luck. It's maybe poor game script at that point that actually might be driven by the drops in a lot of way. The fact that the Ravens didn't have more points on the board put them in a position where Marlon was left on an island late in the game because they had to gamble on a blitz on 3rd and 4 there. So I understand that. But then there's other stuff where I think there may have been a general mantra for everybody to get back on the field because we need everybody. And it's the Steelers this week. And, this is a big game. And it was a huge game. But I don't think anything was served by having Marcus Williams back on the field this week when Geno Stone could have been the guy. And I'd honestly say if his health is not significantly improved from what it was this last week, when it looked like he's playing with one arm, and it really shows up in his tackling. It shows up even in his approach to the ball carrier, being more cautious and whatnot. The safeties have some of that anyway, but he's not, he's not coming downhill with the kind of abandon that we've certainly seen, because he just doesn't have that much to offer as a tackler when he gets there. So he's more trying to angle, players towards the sideline. That one first down early in the game was very notable in that regard. But anyway, the point being, you've got a very fine player back there in Geno Stone who can cover half the back end. You'd love to have both him and Williams available so you could play Hamilton in that nickel spot. But you've also got Arthur Mollett, who's played well enough. And if you move Hamilton to the back end with Stone, I think you maintain the Ravens, what has really worked for the Ravens this year. And I'm going to have a separate episode on this, but the Ravens' ability to defend the run while in nickel and while in a too high nickel shell specifically has been amazing this year. It's been absolutely amazing. They've had one of the lowest success rates and one of the highest run into rates of any team in the NFL. And that is the Ravens hallmark. So it's a function of what their linebackers are doing. It's a function of what their defensive line is doing largely. And it's a function of what Kyle Hamilton can do for you when he's in that nickel role and coming downhill. But anyway, I really want to see the Ravens, deploy their secondary in a way, not necessarily that's aligned with who was the better player at the start of the year, who they thought was going to be the better player. If Marcus Williams isn't ready to go, the Ravens are just not well served to have him out there.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, you can't call it anything other than a breakdown in decision making to let him out there. Whether it's Marcus Williams just telling coaches he's ready when he's not, which is a thing that many young players will do because they want to compete. We understand that, but or the coach is kind of saying, "Hey, we need you out there." In the pre-production meeting, I mentioned that it sort of reminded me a little bit about Derek Mason playing with one arm against the Cowboys in 2008. The difference was that Derek Mason really was one of the only receiving options that the Ravens had, so they absolutely did need him, and he was able to function on some level. He could still run routes. He didn't have to tackle anybody. I mean, he was getting tackled and he was in pain, but he didn't have to tackle anybody, which is one of Marcus Williams' core functions. And it's really not a good look to have him out there. We have Millette who can play in the slot, and yeah, he's not as good as Hamilton. Okay, sure, but it's certainly a better option to have two capable safeties and a capable person in the slot than what we trotted out last week.
Yeah, and I'm okay with the fact that Marcus Williams clearly wanted to play. That's great. I want a competitor like that, going to war with that guy week after week. I want him, but there comes a point, and it was pretty early in this game. It was, I think, first quarter that he allowed the first down near the left sideline, where I would have said, just wow, you're playing hurt, and you're obviously going to have difficulty tackling in this game. I got to put Geno back out there. And Geno ends up playing 19 snaps and effectively is wasted for this game. And when the Ravens really, really needed him. Now they played great. They played well enough defensively with Marcus Williams in there.
Sure. That
they certainly didn't lose the game, but they also had Marcus Williams coming on the blitz on that 3rd and 4, where I'm not sure if they would have done it differently and maybe rushed one less to try and get after the quarterback, kept Marcus Williams back as a high safety, and he might have had some impact on that play. Don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm confident enough to say that what Marcus Williams provided was not sufficient enough to keep Geno Stone on the bench for as much as he was. So I think that was a mistake by the staff, and to some extent a mistake on Marcus Williams' part.
All right. It's always great to do the show with you, Slava. Tell folks where they can talk football with you online.
I'm on Twitter at Slava Cooperstein. That's SLAVAKUPERSTEIN.
All right. Outstanding. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a film study short, getting lots of submissions recently, but I'd love to hear from you. DMs are always open on Twitter. Any kind of thought experiment is good. Any kind of discussion about maybe a particular player you think would make a good Raven, or a scheme change, or whatever it might be. And I really do love thought experiments specifically. So you have a real idea of equating the value of A or B. And I'll give you an example. A few years ago, when Chad Pennington came to the Orioles, that was in the 90s. Great fanfare, tremendous strikeout to hit ratios at AAA, and the Orioles, did not have a lot of great AAA players at the time. So it was a big deal whenever a really promising guy came up. And a friend of mine asked me, if you could just turn in Brad Pennington to the league for a certain number of wins, how many would you do it for? That kind of thought experiment is really interesting to me. It doesn't have any bearing on what can be done necessarily with football, but it helps build a framework for us of what's a good thought. So anyway, thought experiments always welcome. Love to hear from you. And I'll just say, for Slava Cooperstein, this is Ken McCusick saying goodbye. We'll talk to you next week on One Last Thing.